I'm joined today by Joel Joseph, who's the co-founder of Made in the USA Foundation and also author of the book Inequality in America, 10 Causes and 10 Cures. Joel, it's so great to talk to you. I want to start with sort of the general concept of how wealth is created and also the ways you've determined that wealth can create poverty or how poor people can be created by wealthy people. Give us a sort of overview as to how we can get into this line of thinking.
Well, one of the largest causes, I think, and most economists agree, of the increase in income inequality in the United States has been due to trade. We have lost about 5 million jobs to Mexico and Canada, Mexico and China. And what that does is that shifted the profits, the money, to the large multinational corporations and taken it away from the working class. The average wage in the United States has not increased in the last 25 years. And that's due mostly, 40% at least, to our trade agreements.
So Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee, has made a pretty big deal within his campaign of talking about how damaging these trade deals have been. He has gotten attention. He's gained traction with that sort of discussion. And he often talks about bringing these jobs back from Mexico and from China. Now, let's put aside a little bit the personal hypocrisy of the fact that he has sent some of those jobs for his own businesses himself to Mexico and China. Let's ignore that for now. What I want to focus on is, are those jobs still around even to be brought back? Or is it unrealistic at this point to think that many of these manufacturing jobs, which at one point were sent overseas into Mexico, many of those have been automated, have they not? So is the idea of bringing the jobs back a realistic one?
Well, so we definitely have lost some jobs to automation, but I'm not a Trump supporter, but he has made some good points. And some of the companies he's pointed to recently, the Carrier company that makes air conditioners in Indiana right now is planning to move to Mexico. So that's a clear and present example. Similarly, Nabisco from Chicago, maker of Ritz crackers and Oreos, is planning to move production to Mexico. So those are real jobs that can be lost right now. So
When
those
we
can be
think, oh, I'm sorry, go
saved.
ahead. Yeah.
Those jobs can be saved. They haven't gone yet.
When we think about how we measure wealth, we can go back quite a ways to when the concepts of lending and credit and the sort of so-called entrepreneurial cycle became prevalent in modern societies or societies that were modern several hundreds of years ago. And a lot of that idea is based on the assumption that in the future, things are going to be better off than they are today. And underlying this is the idea of unlimited growth on a planet that, of course, is of a limited size, right? The Earth is not getting bigger. At a certain point, certain resources will no longer be available. They will be used up. At a certain point, although we're quite far from that now, we will have issues in terms of population. So big picture, are we even really measuring wealth in the right way when we just look at money and trade, or are we ignoring some pretty important barometers when we make an analysis along those lines?
Well, some qualities of life cannot be measured, like, you know, how well you live is not necessarily determined by how much money you have. Um, for example, you get a lot of benefit out of vacations, but we can't really quantify that in terms of dollars. The European countries do have about 6 weeks of vacation, where we have an average of about 2 weeks of vacation. So I'd say concerning vacations, at least, Europe has a better quality of life, and that's not necessarily measured in GDP or dollars.
And what sort of other factors should be considered when we think about wealth and well-being? I mean, should effect on the environment be something that's considered? And if so, how can you really measure that in this equation? Just as an example, and if you have others, by all means.
Well, the environment's a great example. In economics, I studied economics both in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And externalities, like air pollution. An externality is something that you produce when you're making a product that's not counted in the cost of the product. That certainly has a great impact. And as you know, pollution does cause cancers and other health issues. So those externalities are difficult to measure, and that's another reason I think that we have to clamp down on some trade deals. For example, we have the toughest air pollution laws in the world, and because of that, we lose jobs to Mexico and China, where their environmental laws, although on the books they look pretty good, they're very lax. So, for example, all of our battery production, which is a very dirty process, has shifted to Mexico. So all the pollution from making batteries is now in Mexico, which is, certainly not fair to the Mexican people. And that's one of the externalities that I was talking about.
Very often, when you have a conversation with a so called supply sider or those in favor of more laissez faire economics, and you talk about negative externalities and measuring them, very quickly their position can become, well, you're just talking about a tax. Your solution to these negative externalities is a tax, be it a carbon tax, a pollution tax, whatever the case may be. Can you give us your assessment of whether those types of taxes are the best path forward for dealing with some of these negative externalities, or is that really not the right approach?
Well, I don't think it's the right approach. What I've proposed, and this obviously is long-term solution, is to have a global environmental law where our environmental laws, starting in about 1970, the EPA set standards for example, a refinery. All refineries would have to meet the same air pollution standards. I think we should have something like that worldwide, so there wouldn't be a competitive advantage for countries that didn't control their air pollution.
Now, that is an idea which, while fascinating, in the minds of those who are against so called one world government, would be very hard to get traction with, wouldn't it?
Well, the way I think we can do it is the United States, while we are still the largest economy in the world, can impose those standards worldwide. In other words, if you don't meet our standards for certain things, say for making steel, then we won't import steel from you. So we have the power right now. We might lose that power as our economy diminishes relative to the rest of the world, to impose those standards ourselves without some one world government.
Mm. I want to focus a little bit on poverty as a more big picture question. And there are those who believe that poverty is sort of natural in society, something that will always exist. We just must deal with it. And the idea of eliminating poverty is not a sort of realistic one. Can you address that? I mean, is there is the idea of poverty as a natural phenomenon realistic?
I don't think it is. And in fact, I was just recently looking at the statistics for Switzerland, and I've been to Switzerland several times, and I've never seen poverty there. I'm sure there's some poverty, but their GDP per capita, their total worth per person, income per person, is almost twice that of the United States. So I don't see any poverty there, and I think we can eliminate poverty. In fact, the trade deals that we have had, for example, China's reduced their poverty at our expense. The trade deals have, to some extent, leveled world income by shifting it from the United States and other countries and to China, and the standard of living in India has increased. Where almost everyone in India at one time was poor, and now that's not true. The same in China. Used to be a nation of peasants, and now they have not only a middle class, they have a wealthy class. So poverty is not natural, and we can get rid of it.
Yeah, Switzerland is a fascinating example. I mean, I realized how well things were going there when I showed up and was charged $32 for a cheeseburger and realized that, most of the people there actually can't afford that, interestingly enough. But some point to Switzerland and say, well, look at what they did. They actually passed very restrictive immigration quotas. They very specifically opted out of many of the elements of the European Union that now arguably led to this Brexit sentiment in the UK. Is that a solution, right? Because many will point to Switzerland and say, yes, but look at how they've achieved what they've achieved.
Well, Switzerland gets all the benefits of being part of the European community without actually joining it.
Right.
But they do have 25% of the citizens in Switzerland are from other countries, so they have had immigration. They do have strict controls on it, so they have had immigration. Now, Switzerland's a nation of about 8 million people, so it's difficult to extrapolate that on a country of 300 plus million people like the United States. But we can learn from them. They also have very strict pollution controls, and even though they have the highest wages in the world, they've managed to have a positive balance of trade with the rest of the world.
The book, I will remind you again, is Inequality in America, 10 Causes and 10 Cures. We've been speaking with the book's author, Joel Joseph, and the book is absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate you talking to me today.
Here's a copy of it. Here's what it looks like.
There it is. Thank you so much, Joel.
Thanks for having me.